everything you need to know about the Overwatch League format changes through the firing of the Flame. Are Houston finally good?
And following that, we'll be talking about esports returning to its roots of playing online tournaments instead of playing in massive arenas. And once those games starts, maybe we'll figure out what's actually going on with the Pacific Division. I'm Jayne, this is Avast, and welcome to Contested.
What's up, guys? We're here in the Frontier Communications Studio here in Dallas, Texas. I'm with my co-host, Jayne.
Hello,
and are you
friends.
excited for our first filming today?
I am so excited for new studio, new show, new year, new season. Once the season actually starts getting some games happening.
Yeah, we're filming this before we've actually had too many games occur. It's been mostly Atlantic Division. And from that Atlantic Division, we've seen a couple high performers, because this is sort of a recap what we're talking about, because next week, hopefully, or this weekend, we're going to have that pickup of the league. But we have seen a couple high performers so far. I mean, it's been, teams like Paris, teams like New York. I mean, it's been pretty crazy seeing the perform at least of what we've seen.
And as much as I hate to say it, one of the other high performers that you have to add to that list is also going to be the Philadelphia Fusion. They've been a great team so far this year. But yeah, new season. So we're coming into it, like you said, we've only seen the Atlantic team so far, pretty much. We've seen one game from the Los Angeles Gladiators, one game from the Shock, two from the Fuel. So hopefully we'll see those pickup games coming later. But even fewer games in the Atlantic Division, we have those Chinese teams that we haven't seen any of yet.
Zero. And I mean, I'd put like one game pretty much at the same as zero. And I mean, speaking about those high performers we've seen so far, though, I think some have exploded up onto the stage. And I have to say, one that surprised me out of those three mentioned of the Fusion, the New York, is the Eternal. The Eternal, I mentioned them first. I wasn't expecting Eternal to be this good. I wasn't expecting them to have this synergy so early. But I've heard someone describe it as like the Krusty coaching tree. Because 9K used to be under Shock with Krusty.
Yeah, he
and then
was a
Rush
coach for NRG.
Yes, he was. And now we're seeing that sort of success with the new players they've had. I wasn't expecting to ever in a universe say, yo, Ben Best is looking pretty good.
I mean, he's looking pretty good both on camera and in the game.
Yeah, that's true.
Good looking man, that one. And then they also have the rookie XZ coming out, which he's monstrous, absolutely monstrous. So you've had the Element Mystic squad in Korean contenders, absolutely cleaning house for a long while there. And you're seeing that a lot of those players coming through and actually putting up really stellar performances in their respective Overwatch League teams. It's kind of like Runaway last year. This year, it seems that Element Mystic was the big boy squad that kind of sent their superstars all across the league. And Paris, for me, is one of the teams that has gone under the radar, but I really was not expecting them to come in and be such a hot team at the start of this season.
The hype is real. The heap, as the flex of the heap is real. They're doing great, fantastic even, and I think there's people saying that we sort of underrated Element Mystic as someone that casted them for Korean contenders last year. I sort of underrated their rest of the squad that wasn't Sparkle or Doha.
And most people did.
Yeah, most people did. And then we come in and we're like, man, Hanbin's pretty good. Like, this guy is pretty great. I like Hanbin. Like, that's a good player. And you see, like, just this, an Exy, who is a player that played mostly hit scan at times, but we used to be a flexible player and now is playing for Eternal, and he's just been fantastic. So I think for Eternal, they've really exploded out onto the scene. They had a rough, season 2, their inaugural season, and they've been great this year. So I think they've just been improving and looking better and better after that initial loss.
Now, the interesting thing about Paris to me is that the only blemish on their record, and we'll talk about more about the Defiant later, but they did have a loss to the Defiant. And then the Defiant themselves looked really good in a game 5 against the Philadelphia Fusion, which is another team that's been looking stellar. But I don't know, looking at where the things are now, it might be interesting to look back at those games and see, like, what happened in the Toronto Defiant match, because Paris has looked really, really good in all of their records, both on paper and in game, except for that one Defiant match. And we'll talk about Defiant later, because they're, I had high hopes. I'm a Canadian.
Defying expectations, one could say, with the Defiant. But it's maybe just the settling of a team early on, because it is, the first time going from an all French roster to a mixed, like, French/European roster in Korean. So there is a little bit of stuff that has to take place there. And also, preseason, a lot of teams are still getting visa stuff settled. So we can also, see how that settled in there. And I think when we talk about consistent top performers, we've seen Paris, who's broken out, but New York, always been good and continues to do so, even with some weird roster shuffles.
Yeah, and I'm going to be a little bit on the controversial side with my opinions of New York. I think they're 5-1.
Oh, I know you have controversial opinions about New York.
Like, whenever I look at New York's play, I'm not sure whether it's apathy or whether they're just relaxed, but it doesn't really look like they're putting it all on the field.
So
like
we're going back to the sandbagging method, huh?
Well, it's not sandbagging anymore. They're not nearly as good as I know that they could be. And even though they're rank 1 of the standings right now, I know they got more in the tank. I don't think they're trying as hard as they could. They're not performing to their maximum potential, which is a really weird kind of thing to take at them, is that they don't have to go 100% in scrims or in officials in order to get these results. But it is kind of like, I feel like somebody who's a teacher's just like
a disappointed father.
It's like, you could do better.
You could do better. That would be a fair. I mean, the ghost of Wizard haunts them still in a way, and then
yes.
you feel that disappointment emanating from you. And I think I don't necessarily disagree, but I do say when I look at them, their biggest issues I have always felt is it's the Stabiobi conundrum, where like the man is your brand. And he is really good, like especially on Tracer. But then they tried to play him on Hitscan when you have like Nene on the bench, and then they tried to play Who Are You on Mei, who I was, if you would talk to me and like when I was ranking ZP last year, we were big decriers of like, we were big like, no, Who Are You? We do not want to see him, and especially not on Mei. And I felt it's the same thing when they played Sabiobi Who Are You, they had a lot of issues, and then they swapped over to like a Nene Libero DPS lineup. And I felt that this is way stronger for them. This is far better in their current lineup. It's like, I get they want Sabiobi there to literally and figuratively hold their players' hands on stage and keep them in game and focused. But that is just the far better DPS lineup for them right now, especially when there's a lot of Mei being played and a lot of just pure hit scan, I feel. And I think that's what's really hindered them, is that they haven't figured out early, maybe they have now, that roster.
Yeah, they're also, their confidence can hinder them in other ways as well. There was the interview with Jonak after one of their victories where they said that, they still think that dive is the strongest. And even though the meta went towards like the main McCree, they still thought that dive had a place in the meta, and they still wanted to play dive, and they practiced that, and they're just very set in their ways in that regard as well. So it doesn't really seem like there's much to change their mind. They probably view themselves as one of the best teams in the league, which they are, to the point where they don't look to other teams to really see what the agreed upon best compositions or strategy are. They do their own thing, which, there's benefits to playing off the book and being confident in your own strategies, but
there are downsides.
There are big definitely downsides as well.
When you stand in the face of a meta like an incoming train, you're just like, haha, I believe you cannot hurt me, and then you run over. And that's sort of where, and you would think that, when it comes to changing their mind, they'd be much better at changing their minds, because like I think their head coach now, he is like a neuroscientist, or he's like a specialist in like neurology, things like that, and that's like his big crazy like essentially gimmick, I guess, as a coach. But it doesn't seem like they're doing too much mind changing at times, though I feel like they have adapted as the season's gone on.
Maybe that's kind of the thing where they know that they can make it into the playoffs pretty easily, just doing
whatever
enough to keep themselves mentally healthy. Maybe they're putting more focus on who knows what other kind of extracurriculars you could have as a team in order to try and increase mental health and performance in and off the game. But moving on towards the Philadelphia Fusion, another really, really strong team. What have your thoughts been about them so far this season?
I know those words must have been like sand in your mouth.
Coming out of credit where credit is due, though. I'm not gonna make things up if they're.
Yeah, you have to give them credit still if they improve it. I think I doubted Fusion very heavily too coming into the season. I wasn't quite on the same train as you, but I was also.
I wasn't doubting. I was just hoping.
You were more like projecting your thoughts, and honestly, I felt that way about Fusion 2 coming into the season, because season 1 was just the Carpe show.
Yes.
And season 2 was the no one show for Fusion. It was more of a just I can't believe, like, why are they taking up stage time type of show. I mean, they actually weren't that bad, but they were very disappointing considering they made the grand finals season 1. And then season 3, it seems like Carpe's back, who they've chosen to be franchise player. They're finally in metas where Carpe can play DPS. They still have EQO, but they've actually been trading time with like Ivy, and we're expecting to see that with Hisu as well potentially. And they've looked, and they've made some. They still kept Sato, which has been controversial.
Yes.
But overall, they've made a coaching staff change as well. They brought in KDG, who is from Seoul, who made probably the first coach ever to make like a 12-man roster really sort of work in the Overwatch League, which is tough to do when Fisher's on your team and you have some big egos. And he managed to do it. And when I think about big egos as well, I think Fusion on top of that. And so I think that that this is a roster that is finally living up to its potential a bit. So they look scrappy because we talked about how their game versus Defiant, they went pretty close to map 5. They've been very scrappy at points, but it seems like they're on the up and up. They've also added the British legend, Mr. Weetabix himself, as I like to call him. Weetabix. Yeah, it's like a UK, literally a brick of wheat, and they make it into cereal. Okay, now that's besides the point. We're not going to talk about UK breakfast foods, but the point is that
I feel like we should have a breakfast show.
There should be something.
We should do a cooking show.
I'm okay at cooking. I don't know. I could do a wheat.
We don't have to be good at cooking.
Yeah, a wheat brick you just dissolve in the milk, like in the bowl. So that's pretty easy.
As long as we don't burn cereal, I think we'll be okay.
Yeah, we'll be fine. So I
Wouldn't
think
be my
that
first time.
They've looked a lot better this season.
One of the things that actually really impressed me about the Philadelphia Fusion is like they always have had superstars. Like Poco, Carpe, you called it the Carpe show, and they have been a team that has historically, on occasion, I don't want to say historically, it hasn't always been the case, but Carpe is a walking highlight reel, right?
Yes.
But one of the things that really struck me about the Philadelphia Fusion at the beginning of this season was the fact that they were one of the only teams that found success playing the double shield, the Orisa and the Reinhardt, over the Reinhardt and the Diva. And that's really kind of encouraging to me because you do often see the weaker teams right now, the Dallas Fuel, Boston Uprising, those teams used the double shield and they try and use the meta, try and get the advantage with the higher sustain, higher resources, play these objectives and try and force the opponent team into them when they have the much larger advantage, more barriers, blah, blah, blah. But Philadelphia Fusion, they were playing that composition, but instead of just trying to rely on their hero picks, rely on their compositions, rely on just pick a better 6 characters and win off of just raw statistics, they were still making plays in the same way that you were seeing teams running the Reinhardt and the Diva. So they're not just the superstar show. They're playing compositions that work kind of like that old kind of GOATS does. You need that 6-man synergy, but they're playing it offensive and proactive. And they got, I believe, the highest fight win rate with the double shield composition out of all the teams that played before hero pools got implemented. So that's the sign of a team that not only has superstars and can implement them, but can keep those superstars and their egos in check to actually function as a team. So as much as I hate to say it, I do kind of have my stocks in Philadelphia Fusion.
Yeah, it looks like they're only on the up and up from here.
For sure.
We talked about how they started out a little rough potentially with Defiant, and we should take a look at them next because they're on our low performance.
I have things to say about the Defiant. Man, I had such high hopes for them. Especially after taking a team like the Philadelphia Fusion to a Game 5, a stellar Game 5 with an absolutely heart-wrenching Nepal. And, people were looking at hero pools because they're going into, they've got really flexible players. They've got agilities, they've got Surefour, beast.
I mean, you feel, like I said, define the expectations. And I was very much on the, no, Defiant, I don't think you're that good trained preseason. And I saw them do kind of good and beat Paris. And I was like, wait a minute.
Yeah, wait a minute.
Maybe they're pretty good.
Yeah.
And then now
beat
currently
Paris,
they're sitting in the standing at 1-4.
1-4.
And they just lost to Houston. And and pretty badly, and Mayhem, you know? And I'm like the Canadian boy bands is losing for me. Like
this is unacceptable.
Disaster. No, everywhere, every Canadian fan and Toronto Defiant fan, they're reeing throughout the universe over this. But the reality is that they aren't looking that good. And I've reviewed some of their gameplay and I've looked at the stuff and their last game versus Mayhem, and it just they also were a big proponent of, it was sort of like the New York school of we're gonna play dive. But the difference is they put a poke dive into Florida for when New York played it week 1 into Boston. You know, so it's a very different economies of scale. And it showed because they just weren't that coordinated at all. So it seems like they started out they had that early boost of synergy, and then all the teams that have what some have felt, because when you look at their staff too, they have some staff that was left over from their season last year, which was not very good. And then they got Feifei as head coach, who led Paris Eternal to a glorious, very low season, right?
Yes.
And that doesn't necessarily mean that Feifei is inherently bad, right? It's tough to really see from the outside in a lot of times.
You bring up a good point with Feifei, though. Just like you were talking about New York, where they have kind of a doctor as their head coach. Feifei's background is also
Eagle Gaming, legendary European team.
But they have and they're also their strategic coach Lilbo was also Team Giganti and Eagle Gaming as well.
Ex-player though.
So one of the things, former player. One of the things that really strikes me when I'm looking at the Toronto Defiant is how much they look like a player-coached team. I've worked with Surefour on Team Canada for 2 years, and that man is an A-type personality if I've ever seen one. He knows what he likes. He wants to do those compositions. And I think that as a player, his personality can sometimes overrule the rest of the team or the rest of the coaches, and he can get his way. Which is not necessarily a bad thing. However, when you're going into the hero pools, you have this combination between flexibility, and then you also have people like Dream, the coach for the Houston Outlaws, and they've been talking about how they've been getting like 6 hours of sleep, just constantly working. And I think that hero pools, one of the real big things that's going to be showing is whether or not we see player coach teams being more successful, or teams with really large coaching staffs, really highly structured coaching, again, like the Dallas Fuel, whether these two strategies are the most optimal. And I think that hero pools is going to be one of the things that actually kind of differentiates those two teams. But right now, in my opinion, Defiant is probably the heaviest towards the player coach side of things, not only just in the way that the players act themselves, but also in the fact that you have a strategic coach who is a former player, and Feifei as the head coach. So I think they might struggle. They have that flexibility on paper, but maybe they actually do need a little bit more structure in their team if they are going to actually win against those heavier hitters like Paris and Fusion. But you've got an idea.
I do have an idea, because you've touched upon an interesting segue.
Interesting segue.
Jayne. And the interesting segue is that you've talked about the difference in structure between these player coached and very structured coaching setups. Boston Uprising, the definition of a very structured coaching setup.
We're going. This was your idea.
Someone that personally experienced that in season 1. Now, granted, I didn't personally experience in terms of stage time, but I did personally experience in terms of seeing it in action. And they've tried to keep it. They said they've even said that they've tried to reduce it a bit, but they've always been trying to keep a very structured format, which is something I gave them credit to. Actually, I think the structured formats are very good.
Can be
very good if you do them right. But Boston is currently on our second list of underperformers. They are 1-4, with their only their only win was versus the Houston Outlaws in the legendary, aka Toilet Bowl game.
Yes.
And so that was they're just, and this is after a very mediocre season last season as well.
Yeah.
And we're looking at them again and we're being like, what's happening here with this team? But they also have a very structured coaching style, and they technically do have an ex-player head coach with Mineral.
Yes. And, Huck, who's the president of gaming, he's obviously still very involved with the team. He's
in the Oval Office of Gaming every day working on those executive.
He's very active on social media. He's been doing his AMAs. He's been getting in Reddit threads after your interview with Blase.
Yeah, Reddit threads.
But yeah, Boston is a team that has certainly not looked good. I don't think it would be a stretch of the imagination, especially with the Houston Outlaws picking up their game recently, to call Boston a very sizable contender for the worst team in the league. I don't think that's a stretch. It's not necessarily. I mean,
you can't turn to their recent performances and be like last season, be like, look at all this evidence to the contrary. No, there's nothing to say. And then, as much as I personally like Mineral, and he is an ex-player, he had no success with his previous, because he didn't coach in season 2. He was a Florida Mayhem, which is also one of the worst teams in season 1.
Yes.
And we're seeing this here, and we're like, what's happening here? And then you look at the lack of star power throughout it. Like, the new star for Boston is Jerry, a player that played for Meta Athena in Korean Contenders and didn't even make playoffs, which granted is a tough ask because Korean Contenders 8 teams now, and so you have to be top 8 Korean Contenders, which is a very tough region to be. So. And they've just had a lot of issues, and they're continuing to have those issues, and they just seem completely lost at times. Axiom had to go back to medical leave. They're still they were sort of swapping between do we play Axiom to play Fusions, because Fusions had that good performance at World Cup, but has seemed to be the mouth, eyes, and ears, the entire just senses, all 5 senses for the Boston Uprising at times. And without him, they've seemed lost. But with him, he also hasn't seemed very powerful in sort of main tank roles. It's just a mess. It's just a mess.
And if you're a Boston fan, you really got to be asking yourself, what is the route forward here? They've had trouble not only with the ones you were talking about, also on support. They originally had Swimmer, and they've brought in Hello, I'm Halo now as well. But in the same way that the Philadelphia Fusion was looking really, really strong with their coordination and synergy on those double shield compositions, Boston, they were attempting to coordinate things, but their coordinations were kind of things that work good on paper. They're going to use their ultimates together in some sort of crazy combo.
It was like building a boat in elementary school for science class, but you had to float in the water, and everyone was building the boat differently. And Boston's always what if we make it super economical, and we build out of tissue paper, and it just immediately floats. It's this is really cheap, but it's sinking to the bottom so fast.
Yeah, some of the things, some of the strategies that they were pulling off in the first couple of weeks of the Overwatch League were things that presented issues where you would assume would have failed miserably in scrims, to the point where you'd been hey, we probably need to change things here. Their original, they were trying to do the Baptiste window with a high noon quite frequently.
And then the May.
They just got walled off every time. And at no point did they ever amp speed boost. This is stuff that every single Grandmaster should be pulling off. And Boston's just not. So there's There's things that the players should know. There's things that should be caught in scrims. There's things that, there are reasons that they very clearly would have lost in scrims, assuming they're playing those compositions, which I sincerely hope they are. But there's a serious disconnect for Boston somewhere. And I don't know what it is. And if you're a Boston fan, man, you gotta be asking
If you're one of the 3 Boston fans, it's tough out there for you. And disconnects, you brought up disconnects. You know who else is at a disconnect recently?
What?
The Houston Outlaws. And they're on our 3rd list of underperformers so far. We've had our top and our under, and they're our 3rd and final on that list. And I have to say that they started out really, really bad, Jayne. They were a contender early on in the season of being potentially the worst team in the league. Very early. But now they beat in Paris. They're on the up and up. This seems like they finally felt it. Hero pools, they're playing compositions that feels very confident with them. They're putting Blase on the Doom and Dante on a Tracer and Sombra and Moom on Winston. They're seeming like a team that's back on track. But early on in the season, and even still right now, they're currently only 2-5. And they're looking still pretty rough, even though they've been on the up and up recently.
And my heart goes out to the Houston Outlaws here. Not the fans, because fans are crazy. But
not the fans. Anything but them.
Anything but them. No, like the Houston Outlaws themselves, they have had a rough season off the stage. They've had problems with their original team house where they had to move out because of zoning or whatever it was.
No, it was a homeowner association.
It was a homeowner.
They got
That's
really
even
mad.
better.
All the people, because they lived in a very bougie part of Houston. And all the people there were like, why are all these gamers at this house? And they kicked them out. So
young children, get out.
It was not a good look for them.
Yeah, so like if you are one of the crazy Houston Outlaws fan, you can definitely find excuses for why the start of the season didn't go well. And when we're looking at things like Dream, I've always been a big fan of Dream. I originally encountered him.
You are?
Yeah, I like Dream.
That is very different from the public opinion of Dream.
I know. So one of the things is that I held like a coaching competition back when I was first getting big on Twitch, and Dream actually won it. That was his first appearances. He just submitted a piece of coaching work to one of my open contests, and I was really impressed with him back before he was known. I can hear the Redditors reeing already over this
now, Jayne. I can hear it.
I know, but you know what? It's true. I always like to kind of keep track of the people who I encounter really early on in their careers. So I've been following Dream, and I've worked with him before. I really like his stuff, and I like to see that he's still confident despite the overwhelming wave of negativity that he is understandably and wave of losses. But you gotta admire the balls that he had for that tweet going into the Paris Eternal game.
Yeah, it was a good tweet. It spawned many a copy pasta since then. It's become a meme, but the confidence is good, right? It's always better to be a coach that's overconfident in your team and then takes responsibility for the losses than it is to be one that is invisible or throws people under the bus, or that's the goal of a coach, right? Is like you are the shield for your players in a lot of ways, and you're supposed to believe in your team, and it's your job to sort of lead them. And it's even more so, I think, this season where we add this flexibility and fundamental, and Dream has done a good job.
Yeah, and team morale is super important in Overwatch. There's a lot of qualitatives, communication, teamwork, all those fancy buzzwords. Like they really do matter in Overwatch. They really, really do. But yeah, Dream's tweet where he said that man for man, they have 6 better players than the Paris Eternal. I'm not sure whether or not that's actually
maybe the case.
Maybe.
But they did win.
They did win. They did win
decisively.
Yeah, and we have listed Paris Eternal as one of our heavier hitters. And then so you have this rough start. You have potentially excuses why that rough start is, maybe affecting them. The sickness, the homeowners association, just being the Outlaws in the first place. And then you have a win against the Paris Eternal. But despite that, there's storms on the horizon, and I know that we'll be talking more about this on our Friday
storms
show.
On the horizon.
Storms on the horizon,
because we are going to talk about our Friday show, hopefully.
Yes.
But you talked about being Houston.
Yes.
Well, in the most quintessential Houston thing possible, once Houston start doing better, what is your natural reaction? We'll give you a couple options. Do we continue along the same path?
No.
Do we perhaps make some moderate changes? Or do you behead your entire management team in the middle of a health endemic?
Everyone!
That is the Houston strategy where they recently found out that Flame was let go, Chris was let go from the Houston, the manager, the president of the Outlaws, and then Mezzer announced that he's quitting.
To be fair, they've used this strategy before. Last year, when they actually sold the team, the team immediately started doing better.
But this is in stage 4, right?
Yeah.
So one could make the argument that I feel like in stage 4 there was a meta shift. So who knows if it was actually the team
No, I
sold.
guarantee you that correlation equals causation.
You think the correlation 100%? You have the evidence to say?
We have statistical quantitative evidence that massive management changes equals winning games when you're the Houston Outlaws.
And completely unrelated to anything game.
They've already gained momentum. They wanted to continue that momentum.
So you have to just
fired everyone. Yeah.
As you know, if it's not broke, 100% fix it. 100% just get on in there and change it up entirely. And especially when there's a health crisis going on, what's most important is that CoolMat69 is your one piece of management left
Interim
in the Houston
GM.
Outlaws. That is the most, and esports Chad. Those are your two pieces of management that aren't directed like the Beasley Group, the ownership.
Shout out to Chad, who's going to be mad about everything we're saying about the Houston Outlaws.
He got very mad at me at one point earlier. But the point is that the whole point is that they've lost all this when it seems like they're riding the ship.
And we don't have any kind of big communication or messaging from the Houston Outlaws currently. Trying to find out. Well, we're on the case. Don't worry about it, ladies and gentlemen. But are there any kind of gameplay reasons? Is this purely business? Like, speculate for a second.
I mean, to be fair, Houston have not been what we would call a storied franchise.
No.
They did retire Jake's jersey, some to the awe of some in various forms of awe, like why, or and others like there was when you got to that Houston homestand, there was a feeling of dread, and they were like, what can we do to make this better? We're gonna retire Jake's jersey, and to be fair, it worked. I mean, and there's no reason they can't do it, but it's just weird. So they haven't had they haven't had legitimately any huge success in stage 1. Season 1, okay? So it has been almost getting close to 3 years, but now they're finally picking up again, and it seems weird that and Flame's been in charge of that for most of it. Now in season 2, they had ownership problems, so they didn't have a lot of budget necessarily. They couldn't get a lot of staff that they may have wanted. But it seems weird that now is the time, in the middle of COVID and the league changing, and also with the results picking up. Seems weird that this is the time. Seems weird this is the time they choose it. We're not having replacements, there. And I think that you have to just search for answers because I don't have them currently.
Outside of the management, let's bring this back onto the actual team. At the very start, we saw some interesting gameplay. Blase got memed pretty damn hard for his McCree play, and we saw some other rather interesting performances from the actual Houston Outlaws. But as they kind of progressed in and did get their, the increase in their performance, what were kind of the main things that changed in your perspective?
I mean, because I did that interview with Blase recently, and Blase just said, we just started playing what we were good at. And a lot of people imagine, right? And the ghost of Monty, well, not the ghost, Monty's not dead, but Monty is currently not in Overwatch League. And so, Monty is chuckling just evilly somewhere in the corner. And Blase said, we started playing what we're good at. We came together with the coaches, and the coaches agreed, we just need to play what we're feeling confident with. And a lot of Overwatch gets overanalyzed at times where it's like, oh, look at this incredible set play. But really, it's just players having that instinctual feeling.
There are a lot of things that are just completely adaptable.
Yeah, and just you make a split decision. And when players are feeling comfortable and in roles and heroes they're feeling very comfortable with, they just intuitively make good decisions. And obviously, there's a layer of communication and ult management, things like that goes along with it. That's all part of the coaching. But it's really not that deep occasionally. And Houston just said, let's play what we're good at, which was
and this could also be going back to the overcoaching versus the undercoaching versus, or not undercoaching, but going to more of a player led coaching style. If they are, Dream is obviously a rookie coach in the Overwatch League going in. Maybe he wants to, prove his mettle or really do a lot of work. Overcoaches kind of locks players down into prison, which I've seen. If you try and mandate or regiment what players are, or try and actually make set plays, in the mind of a player or a team, you can have it sometimes where that's pretty much the only thing that person's allowed to do. If you have a plan, you stick to the plan. You can't adapt and improvise. And if you run into something off book, you really need to be able to do that. And if you are going to be adapting, you're going to be wanting to do it on the heroes that you are most comfortable on, most familiar with. So if this is going to be a shift overall in terms of the coaching staff working with the players, trying to find something that both people are most comfortable in a way that the coaching staff can actually assist the players instead of trying to structure them or fit them into a square hole when they're a circle, then maybe despite the executions of management that hopes are alive for the Houston Outlaws.
I mean, the beatings will continue until morale improves, and that's sort of where we're at. And we touched a little bit on it when we talked about, it's a weird time for this to happen, and that's COVID. And we can't neglect to talk about COVID.
Yes.
Right up next. We have to talk about COVID's effect on the league.
Yeah, big changes coming in, and they've been coming out fast and furious for the entire series, or the entire season so far, rather. Originally they were canceling the Chinese games, tried to move that into Seoul. They were going to have the Seoul homestands, and then they were going to have the proceeds from the Seoul homestand go towards helping out with the epidemic. Which one is it?
You can call it both. I feel
like there's going to be
call
some...
it both. I mean, the World Health Organization has called it a pandemic, a global pandemic, but an epidemic, I don't think is that. Yeah. Now, I'm sure we're gonna get hard semantics by someone, but
somebody did tell us in the comments what's the difference.
From me, huh? I wear a suit.
I play video games for a living.
Do you think I'm a doctor?
Yeah,
I'm not a doctor.
I'm not Feifei.
I'm not Feifei.
Yeah, but after that, we saw the games traditionally go down. Not traditionally, they moved over towards California, and then it was kind of like it was like chasing the virus east sort of thing. And I was hoping that we were going to have the homestands here in Dallas as well, but those are canceled. And now everything's canceled, and we're going to online play for at least the next 2 months. So that's going to be a massive change. And John Spector, VP of the Overwatch League, has talked. They don't want to extend the Overwatch League past what it was originally scheduled. Right? I think it's a great decision, but this is also going to be bringing up a lot of questions about competitive integrity. Because not only do we have some games that are happening on LAN, but this is also going to be the first time that Overwatch League games have ever happened online, not on the LAN client. And there are differences between the LAN client and the online client. But in addition to that, we don't have an updated schedule yet. But Shanghai Dragons was originally not, because of the cancellations, we weren't going to see them until week 11.
That's a long time to not see a team.
That's a very long time.
Bring up those issues with when someone has a much longer time to prepare and see strategies, then you'd be like, well, this is a huge head start. But now I would say it doesn't matter as much because you have hero pools, right?
Yes.
So you're not really you're not able to counter strat people quite as much, but it's still a long time to sit there and prepare and
in the same way, there's also a huge difference between scrimming and officials, and you never really know where you suck until you actually step on that stage, play an official, and see where the cracks are, right? You can scrim 1,000 times, but players play differently in scrims between a scrim and a stage match. And I think that, a lot of these teams, Los Angeles Gladiators and the San Francisco Shock, with these online games, I assume that we're going to have a lot of makeup games in the Pacific Division, which means that we've only seen the Shock play once. We've only seen the Gladiators play once. And I think that, at least for me, that seems pretty optimal. Play one game, get that stage experience, kind of see where you are, test it in an official match. And then after that, just go, prep, get ready for hero pools, and then roll right back in there. I think that you've got to have that kind of sense of anxiety, or really how good are we?
So you're saying them playing one game is inherently better than the other Korean or Chinese teams that have played zero?
Yeah.
I mean, I'd agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah, for 100%. Sure. If you were the Shanghai Dragons and you're not playing till week 11, there has to be so much pressure on you. Because at this point, you have a little bit of advantage because nobody really knows how good you are, but you don't know how good you are either. You have no idea.
Well, it's the classic scrimbucks versus the actual what happens when you're on stage. And I consider playing one game at this point, sure, it's better than zero, right? But I consider it in terms of where we know these teams were at.
Yeah,
it's essentially zero. Architect played Ana for the Shock, okay, in week 2.
Architect did fantastic.
And he wasn't bad or anything. They said, Krusty, said it was very good, and that was their plan going into it. And they won, but it still was interesting. We just don't know what they're going to be doing, right? And then hero pools adds that variability more. You have a coach like Krusty at the head that really does stuff that seems unconventional at times, like putting Architect on, right? You don't know what Shock's going to roll with when the spawn door is open and how they're going to come on out.
Yes.
And it really increases that unknown factor in that, when we talk about the competitive integrity too, it's going to be even more variables added when you have the variables of hero pools. There's just so many variables because you have to deal with ping, you're gonna have to deal with latency. You're gonna have to deal with just the fact that you're on a LAN client and the tick rate is different than online. Because Winston literally, I can't remember if they've changed this now or in between, but Winston, and then they used to have the Lucio scroll wheel.
Yeah, the Lucio scroll wheel bug.
They literally had to nerf
it. They just straight up banned it
because the tick rate was so high that it would go so fast. It's an entirely different game on LAN at times. In terms of the responsiveness and the latency and how you feel playing as a player.
It's the same game, but things like the tick rate means that Winston's damage is applied differently, or Lucio's wall ride happens differently. The game feels differently. There's, I assume that once the games happen. It is going to be interesting to see at what level of ping the players play on. And
I know they're trying to keep those 3 regions, right?
Yes.
They have like the Korean and the Chinese teams playing in one region, then they have like the Atlantic and the Pacific. So they're trying to keep them very regionally based so the pings are not crazy, which is a very fair thing.
It's very smart too.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's the best possible compromise. You have to give the props.
Like you have had, it's not unheard of, at least in the tier 2 region or tier 2 scene, just in general, for people to be playing from a different region and competing. You know, you had like Trill was a very famous example, and then especially the teams that had Koreans, it was very common for players to have like 150 ping playing semi-professionally. So you know the precedent for online professional play is there in the semi-professional.
Just not ideal, because obviously
it's certainly not ideal, but it's not
downgrade.
like this is the end of the world to have what I would assume be near 30 milliseconds of ping.
It's really put it back into perspective, like the roots, you know, of esports, where we've gone back, we've gone up there, and then we've gone back.
And this is actually really interesting too, because they've canceled a lot of the major sports league. MLB is done, NBA is done. I don't remember the full list. You know, I pay attention to esports, not real sports. But this is also kind of a cool opportunity for, you know, we have all this dead time on like ESPN, for example. You know, and if we do still have these games from the professional esports league, maybe this is a time when everybody's in quarantine and on spring break.
It's our time to shine.
It's our time to shine.
We seize the gap. We shoot the gap.
Missionaries of esports go out and seize the day and spread the word.
They proletistize?
One of those words.
It's one of those words. It's a word. And once again, remember, it's not like I get paid to speak about things, okay? So remember that. That's the important part here. And we've talked about the unknowns of all this.
Yes.
And speaking of unknowns, the Pacific Division as a whole, essentially.
Yeah.
We've had the max they played is two games.
It's like, it's been referred to as the division of death repeatedly.
But the thing is, I mean, it's certainly the death of, you know, hours watched, because nothing has played, right? Because the max is Titans and Valiant and then Fuel with 2 games each.
Yes.
And then you have Shock and Gladiators one game, and then every other team at 0. So we don't even know. Like the most we've had is like, I've talked to like Nero once about Scrim Experience, and he said like Shanghai is really, really good apparently. Like Shanghai is really, really good. Seoul's okay. And that's it. You know, I've heard that Chengdu is still Chengdu, and they're living in a weird fantasy land of like, we're going to play whatever we want, and we're going to roll around on ball, and Amon is going to just do weird crap all the time. You know, like
that's Chengdu. I mean, that's what Chengdu fans want. That's what they expect. That's what they're going to get.
It's a very weird situation to be in when we're getting into like the week 6 and 7s of the league, and we don't even know what like half of the teams are.
It makes for exciting watching.
It does. It makes for very exciting watching, and like the changes in the hero pools, but it's going to be interesting to see how these teams have changed, what they've learned from watching the Atlantic teams play, and how different, because, you know, there was that theorizing of we're going to see different metas in different regions.
Yeah.
And we might actually see it now, because we're literally regional play.
Yeah, that was one of the things that Nero was talking about as well, is that I think he made some comment about Farah that everybody reacted to in the comment. Like most of the players in there were, of course, Western professionals, and Nero and Neptuno, who are both Guangzhou Charge. They, you know, obviously scrimming of primarily Chinese teams, and just from the few comments that came out, it did seem like the Chinese teams had a completely different take on the meta, in the same way that, you know, we talked about New York just seems to, you know, not care about other teams and does what they want. China as a region, you know, this has happened in Chinese contenders as well.
So many times where I've tuned into Chinese contenders and I'm like, what are they doing?
Yeah,
like they were playing Hog. They were still playing Roadhog in 2018 and 2019. And I was like, what is this? Yeah. Why are you playing the ult battery hero? Why am I looking at this? Like, it doesn't make any sense.
Like, they did the I think they were the first teams that came out with the Doomfist Genji dive. They were the first teams that were doing real hard Zarya Doomfist engages. You know, they have been some pretty cool strategies that come out from China, but at the same time, a few times it's kind of seemed like they had almost like a gentleman's agreement not to play.
Yeah, it's like in Call of Duty where like the
yeah.
teams would just agree, like,
we're
not going to play this. We're not going to use this.
Yeah, it's not mandated by the league. It's not mandated by the developers. Yeah, so it like a few times watching Chinese contenders looking at the meta, the only explanation has been like, must be a gentleman's agreement. Like,
it's very
this
weird
composition sucks, isn't fun to play. Let's do Farah and Doomfist.
And there are some very hype players entering from the Chinese scene this year as well. You know, we have Leave. The Chengdu Hunters, obviously, most notably.
Oh, man.
And
don't give me PTSD from World Cup, man.
Yeah, you know about how Leave, what he can do.
Leave.
He is a very, very
He's a very good individual. And yeah, he just turned 18 there in October of last year. So finally eligible. But yeah, that is...
He's scary, but it's weird because it's like putting it's like taking a bucket of water and throwing it into the ocean is what Leave is to Chengdu. Because it's like,
okay, you're gonna have to explain this analogy
because
to
they
me.
have Jinmu, and they have, they have all these really talented players that they had before, like Jinmu. They had Yang Xiaolong. They had, Bake Jack. Though granted, a lot of those players have left and right, but like there was never really necessarily a dearth of DPS talent.
No,
especially with Jinmu being such a talented flex DPS, and then you had Leave, who is the definition of a flex DPS. And like, sure, don't get me wrong, I'll always take Leave. I'll take him or leave him.
Get out.
And the point is that let me leave. The point is that it's not that it's bad, it's just weird, right? Because he's going onto a team that he'll improve, but it's not like that was their most lacking department. I would argue that it was probably their tanks, because they had a ball one trick. They had Amon that could only play
Don't you
ball.
Speak ill of Ameng's name.
And then they have added some depth there with A-Ting, though.
Yeah.
And they've added Molly and Linksa, and Linksa was on the list to potentially go to Valiant at one point, but the Visa stuff came up, and everyone expected one of the other Chinese stars that were rising, Coldest, to be on Chengdu, but ended up going to Spark.
And you before the show recorded, you were sharing an interesting tip, because Coldest is not an individual that I'm familiar with, but you were saying that he's an individual who is really heavily hyped up.
It was like I don't think you can quite say like necessarily like the Chinese Jonak per se.
Yeah,
but it was a player that it was in that territory of very hyped up players entering the league as a flex support position. Yeah. And everyone expected him to go to Chengdu, because it's sort of just like, that's the China team, like this is the team that's really representing China. They don't have a mixed roster at all. And then they end up going to Spark, and which is, I think, actually not a better overall roster decision, because Kyo, I think, is underrated for Chengdu in terms of the flex support role. But Bebe or however you want to say it, Bebe, I don't know. It was solid for Spark last year, but never really felt like there was that star power. Well, I think Coldest can do that for Spark.
And another addition onto the Hangzhou Spark is, of course, Otto. Yeah, you guys sometimes kind of felt like he was locked into the prison that was the Shanghai.
Prodigal son of Overwatch.
Yeah, he was Shanghai Dragons Season 1 during their 0-40 season. And then after that, Washington Justice, I believe. And they had during their...
not a good run for Otto.
So I think we did the math on this earlier, but his cumulative win-loss record in the league so far is 8-60. So of the teams that he's been on, not the games that he's played in, but 8-60.
It has just not been a good time for Otto.
And he's a good player.
Yeah, I mean, we saw great things from him the Stage 4 Season 1 from Shanghai. Yeah. We've seen some flashes of brilliance at other points, and maybe Spark could be the place where he could be. We've always felt like, from Season 2, Spark did pretty well, especially towards the end of the season. And they got the playoffs, and they did okay. And they had a pretty solid DPS lineup with Bebe and Godsby. Or not Bebe, but Bazzi and Godsby. And it seemed like every team needs depth, and maybe Otto allows them to get that depth. I mean, they also have Sasson, who hadn't played a lot, but apparently has been reportedly playing a lot more for them. But we'll see once we get to stage, right? Scrimbucks are Scrimbucks. And Spark has mostly remained the same. Other than that, it's pretty much the same team. They were good last year. They started out slow. They might do the same this year. We don't know. And I think they're 100% when we talk about unknowns, they're like even more unknown than some of the other unknowns, because not only have they not played, but they also start out seemingly from last year very slow and then pick up. So it's going to be interesting to see them develop when they've made very minimal changes.
Okay, so that's Chengdu and Hangzhou. You were talking about Seoul. Nero was saying that they're okay. Now, Seoul, their new pickups, I'm blanking here.
Gesture, of course. Gesture. Yes. They received Gesture. They received Profit. They made the great London trade, where London has gone from like this crazy Apex winning squad, like that's been meshed together like a ball of Play-Doh, and just like making like one, like, oh, I'll just take two of my favorite colors, and I have GC Busan, I have Chengdu Pantera, but like now they have like all trials level Korean players, which isn't inherently wrong. It's a shift,
different approach, and if you're
a shift, And I have to say, I'm sure Jack is feeling much lighter because of all the salary burden that is lifted from him. So I'm sure Jack is feeling like much lighter in the pocket area after that, or not lighter, but I guess heavier. Yes, I guess it's the inverse of what you would expect to be heavier. And they've put those players, Profit and Gesture, onto Seoul. They've also got in Bedoshin. And then Jaehong went to Titans and stuff like that. Fleta went to Shanghai, and Shanghai, people were saying it's monstrous.
Yeah, Shanghai's rumored to be extremely
very, very good. And they have Fleta and Void. They've also gotten a previous contenders player with stand 1, which people rated as pretty low, but is apparently very adaptable and has looked pretty good. He's had good moments. And they have Lip, who is insanely tall, but also very, very good. An unknown player that I didn't really know much about and has broken onto the stage and apparently has continued to be very good in what we were hearing from those scrim areas. But Seoul, that's what people are very interested about because they're the Seoul Korean team, the Seoul Korean team. And I can't stop. And they have been rated as okay. Yeah. But I actually think that maybe this upcoming week, they might be pretty good because of the hero pools, because we're running double shield again. And I feel like they're almost sort of built for hero pools when you have Marvel and Gesture, and you've seen Gesture's Orisa, and it's been pretty good before. So I actually think they're kind of built for this particular hero pool coming up next week.
Do you think Seoul's going to be doing the same thing that they kind of did last year with the A squad and the B squad?
Well, that was with KDG, right?
Yes.
And speaking of the ghost of it was very early on, the ghost of Wizard Young. Wizard is now on Seoul. So who knows if we're going to see the sandbagging narrative take place in Seoul now, right?
Yes.
But he's not necessarily the head coach, and I think that it'll be. I don't think KDG has so far been the only one to make it work. So I don't know if we'll see a lot of the A squad and B squad being used. I think we're going to see a lot more substitutions regardless because it's been an interesting time. There's been a lot more travel than expected, and who knows what happens after this period where the homestands be canceled for COVID and we move back to maybe the regular format. I could expect to see more substitutions, but who really knows exactly if that dual squad method's even going to be employed for Seoul now that KDG is not there.
So that's 4 teams. Who are we missing? We've got Seoul Dynasty. We talked about Guangzhou Charge. So our boys. Of Nero. Yeah, speaking of Nero, and Neptuno being the recent addition during the off break there. But other than that, pretty much the same squad.
Yeah, they haven't changed too much overall. I think for them, it's more of, do they retain some of the explosiveness they had? Because they had some very explosive points. Hoppa's obviously moved away, and Hoppa added that flexibility and had good moments for them. But they still have Shu, they still have Nero, they still have Eileen. And then you put Neptuno now, who we're assuming is going to be the starter over Chara.
Yeah.
And they have Rio. They have a lineup that we think has been pretty good. They've added, I think it's Krong. I believe it. Yeah, it's Krong.
Yes,
They've added Krong from Korean Contenders. So you would think that they're mostly about the same. And so for them, it's about finding consistency because they had great moments last season.
Especially near the end.
They had great moments.
Well, that was one of the things that I wanted to bring up is that actually Guangzhou Charge's increase in performance during the end. Words are hard.
Words are hard. It's not like we get paid to speak.
We don't get paid to speak at all. But Curry Shot was one of the late additions to the
now with Gladiators, though.
He's with Gladiators now.
Yeah.
But he was one of the reasons, at least in my opinion, that the Guangzhou Charge did have that pickup in performance near the end of the season. Now he's gone. Jin's still the head coach of the Guangzhou Charge, so they're going to be kind of going back to the original coaching of the style that they had at the very beginning of season 2, which wasn't nearly as strong as what they showed in kind of the playoffs near the end of the year.
I think that it's just for them capturing the fire, the putting that lightning in the bottle, because you have the potential.
Yeah.
It's just, do you ever hit it? Because they also started out pretty weak as well, and like you talked about. And so, and with a mostly not totally unchanged, but with a lot of the core remaining the same, with a lot of your staff sort of remaining around the same similar core as well, do they get results? And the answer is we don't know, because we're talking about unknowns.
We don't know.
We're going to have to wait to see.
We're going to find out soon, though. We can speculate about these holidays. It's going to be much more interesting to talk about it once the games have actually played. And what do you think with all these games happening? Because they're not going to be extending the season, so we're going to have a lot of these games happen. We're going to finally figure out what's going on in the Pacific Division. These 2 games, Gladiators, Shock, all the Chinese teams playing. Do you think there's going to be any kind of viewer fatigue, or with spring break and quarantine, or are we just going to binge?
Well, spring break's finishing up at least. So, I guess spring break, isn't it? Right?
Just started.
Oh my goodness! It's been so long since I've been in school.
Yeah,
I don't even know when spring break.
Most schools are also doing like the 3 week because they're doing 2 weeks.
That's so right. I forgot they have longer school camp. This is what it's like getting old, huh?
Yeah.
This is what it's like.
Imagine.
Well, I think viewer fatigue is always something to be worried about, but considering that they're still planning to keep it on the weekend format, it's still less total time throughout the week, right? but also it depends on how they're actually going to end up doing the schedule right. If they pack it in with a bunch of games, then maybe we could see that. If they keep it spread out, then we don't know.
And if anything, anything's going to be better than seeing just the same few teams.
The same Atlantic teams. After I've seen Justice play
what
for
did you call the match between the Outlaws and the
Toilet Bowl?
The Toilet Bowl.
The Toilet Bowl.
We don't need to repeat it that one.
But I don't think the Toilet Bowl necessarily will repeat itself. I think that was an early game phenomenon, hopefully.
That was
once you've gotten to like the 20th Justice game and the 20th Justice homestand, and you see the acrobats rolling out with the mascots of DC, and you're like, I've seen a lot of these DC mascots. Like, perhaps we need to change this. I don't need to see the circus. I want to see. I mean, it's not that it's not cool. It's nice. I just want to see something different. And so hopefully now we can see that moving forward. Obviously, it won't be the homestand format, but it'll be nice to get answers to all of that. It'll be fantastic to finally get answers to all of it.
I'm looking forward to it. But that's all the time we have for today. I hope you enjoyed our first episode here in the Frontier Communication Studio of Contested. We are going to be back on Friday with our next show. This show is going to be happening Tuesdays and Fridays, premiering at 5 Central. So if you did enjoy it, I'll see you then. But also, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe in the section below. Let us know what you liked and what you'd like to see in the future.
And also, in addition to that, I want you to add below, who should CoolMatt69 be dueling with to be the next GM of Outlaws? Should it just be only CoolMatt? That's the new administrative staff for Outlaws entirely? Or should it be a new candidate? Let me know below as well.
Make them fight pistols at dawn style.
Yeah, you just need to let me know there, because I think it's going to be very interesting if he's the only staff member.
Okay, see you Friday, guys.